So welcome back to the channel, everybody. I know it's been a minute since my last full helmet build, and I really do apologize about that, but I really wanted to do something a little bit different. I've done a lot of movie and television helmet builds and memorabilia, but I want to do something for our gamer friends out there. So I came up with the idea of doing the Lich King from World of Warcraft, and I have to say, I think this build just came out absolutely fabulous, but it was extremely challenging. So I'm going to be doing a two-part series. In the first part, we're going to go through how I smoothed it, finished it, and painted it. But in the second part, I'm going to take you through the steps I had to do to get this to actually print out, how I oriented it on the build plate, and how I placed supports, because some of the parts I had to do 4 or 5 times to get it to print off properly. So that video will be coming up soon. In the meantime, we'll take you out to the shop and we'll go through how we finished it. The very first thing we're going to need to do is get the supports on. We have to be real careful because I surrounded these points with supports, also underneath, because I put so many extra supports and surrounded all those points. We're going to have to take our time. Now, if we break something off, it's not the end of the world. We don't need to reprint it. We can glue it and bond it back on, but we do want to be as careful as possible. So hopefully you can see it here. The parts don't line up perfect, and that's partly because I did print them using 2 different slicers on 2 different printers, and I had a feeling that might happen. I've seen that in the past, but it's not a real big deal. All we're going to do, we're going to grab a little Dremel tool and kind of smooth this out and make these parts match up so I could glue them together. So then I'll glue them and I'll go ahead and weld them on the back side of this. So to do this, we're just going to use a little sanding bit in our Dremel tool. We're going to keep the speed real low on this. We don't want to generate heat and melt the plastic. All we want to do is smooth it out a little bit to get the parts to match up. So one thing I wanted to show you too, if you can see that, there's some little ridges. So when we're going to put the glue on here and we're going to line it, look for places on your print that you can use any details in the print to actually get the print aligned. So instead of gluing it or aligning it from the front, we're going to align it from the back. Make sure you have your glue ready. I'm going to be using the Scigrip 16. Make sure you have your soldering iron nice and hot, ready to start welding it, because how this print's going to be sitting is we're not going to be able to set it back down once we do this. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to get the glue on this piece. And don't worry if it gets a little sloppy and messy. I'd rather have a little too much versus not enough. And we're going to go, like I said, from the back side. And I'm going to get this lined up with the ridges that are currently in the print. We're going to hold it long enough to let that glue set. And this glue sets really fast. We're just going to put a couple small tacks in there. The reason we're doing that is we're going to let them solidify or harden back up that plastic. Then we'll spin it around and check our alignment. If it's good, we're going to go back over and weld it up. And it's not quite dry yet. The glue's just tacky enough to hold. And we're just going to get those tacks put in there. So what we're going to do right down in this area, I took a piece of filament, I bent it in half and doubled it up. I like doing this for something like this. I want to get a little bit more filament in there. We're going to straighten it out, and then we're just going to take it and kind of push the filament into this crack that we have. Like I said, you can use, if you're more comfortable using a 3D pen, some people find them a lot easier. Awesome, go ahead and use it. They do a great job too. Okay, now before we move it, we're going to make sure that hardens. You can see where I put that weld in right along that seam. So this piece does have a little indexing tab on it. I did have to file it just a little bit to get it to fit a little better. We're just going to put a little bit of glue on that and go ahead and connect it. So in order to glaze it, once again, we're going to be using our USC Pro Glaze with the hardener. We're going to go ahead and knead this together. Get it mixed up real even. Don't put too much hardener in, especially when you're mixing small quantities. All we're doing is going right around this little point. And honestly, I'm going to put it on. I'm going to just use my finger. And that's it. So now the last thing I want to do before we go ahead and primer it, I want to fix some of these points. I'm not too worried about that one, but these two, I just want to make sure they're symmetrical. I know the tip got broke off a couple of these. I'm not really that worried about it. It is on the back of the helmet, but like this point, I broke a big chunk of it off. So in order to do that, we're going to be using just some regular green putty. So I got a little piece of it here, and we're going to knead it together, and then we're going to go ahead and kind of just sculpt this in. We'll go ahead and address this little point over here too. So while that's drying, we're going to go ahead and just sand this part where we put this glazing compound in and get that smoothed out. We're going to be spraying it with a high build primer. What we're going to be using for that is our Roberlo Multi-filler Express. I'm going to mix reducer into this. I want a thin coat. I don't want a real heavy coat like we did on some of our previous helmets. For that, I'm going to be using that D1 drizzle to put the primer on. I changed the tip over to a 1.5. There's a bunch of areas with some finer detail, and we don't want to cover that detail up. Now we're going to have to put multiple coats on because we're doing it this way. That's fine. Some of the areas we're going to spray heavier to cover up some of the layer lines. Other areas we're just going to give it a nice light coat so we don't cover up too much of the detail. You can also use the high build primer that we've used in the past. This stuff works great. I don't have a lot of it left, but if you wanted to, you could put multiple coats with this high build primer on, and that would work just fine too. So we waited about 15 minutes till it flashed. And by flashed, most of the shiny spots are gone. The primer's flattened out. We're going to go ahead and give it another coat. I'm not going to sand it between coats, but we're really going to focus on these areas where we have a lot of layer lines. And I'm going to try to stay away from the areas with the detail in it. So now that the primer's dried I let it dry for about an hour. We're going to go through and we're going to do some quick sanding. We're only going to hit some of the spots where we got some runs and drips. We don't need to sand this thing perfect. We are going to be putting a textured coat on it, so that's going to cover some of the real minor layer lines. We got it primered, we sanded most of our major areas. There's still a few little layer lines. We're not going to worry about them. We're going to be putting a texture coat on. But before we put the texture coat on, because it's going to be really hard to get in the cracks, we're going to go back and spray it flat black. So for the base coat, we're going to need a couple things. One, we're going to need some just regular baby powder. And we're going to fill up a little bowl or container, put a couple tablespoons of baby powder in it. Then we're just going to take some of this black craft paint and we're going to mix that in with the baby powder. We're making a paste. This is going to allow us to make kind of a grainy base coat. We want it to build a little bit. We don't want perfectly smooth base coat because we want this to be cast iron looking, and cast iron always has a little bit of texture. And all we're going to do is take in with this little sponge and sponge that on our helmet. We're going to just go around, we're going to do the whole thing just like this, making sure we get into all the little areas. We put that black base coat on there because there's going to be some little corners and crevices that we're probably not going to be able to get into. So that'll at least fill those. To actually do the faux cast iron, we're going to be using this Deco Art zinc, highlighting it with the shimmering silver. This is the exact same process I use for Revin. And we're going to go ahead and just start dabbing it on to our model. Now, when we're putting it in, just like with the other one, we're not trying to get into all the little recesses and corners. We really want to keep a variation, and I'll turn that around so you can see. We really want to keep that a bit of a variation from our highlighted areas to the shaded areas. Now that we got our base coat of silver on, we're going to go ahead and put our highlights on, and we're just going to hit the high ridges, the high points, some of the open flat areas like along the back in these panels. Anywhere that would show some signs of rubbing or polishing or wear, and that's really what this is going to do, is give that effect. And this is the shimmering silver. It's the Deco Art color. And go ahead and start applying it just to the areas we want highlighted. You don't need much, and we're really going to work this out and blend it in. Now that we got our second coat of silver or shimmering silver on, what I want to do is I want to soften up some of the transitions into the areas where there's shading. For that, I'm going to be using my airbrush with a little bit of this golden shading gray. I'm just going to kind of work it in some of those areas. Help soften the transition out. I'm really happy with how it looks. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to top coat it with a matte clear coat. I want it to keep that flat look. It's a 4-to-1, uses an activator. Same clear coat I used on the Revan helmet. I know I still have to do this gem in his forehead. So after it's top coated with the matte clear coat, I'm going to real lightly sand it to smooth it out. I'm going to paint that, and then I'm going to top coat that with a gloss clear coat. So as always, good ventilation and a respirator are an absolute must whenever you're spraying clear. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This was a ton of fun to build and paint. One thing I didn't include in the video, and I'm sure you probably noticed, is how to paint the little blue gem in his forehead. And truthfully, it's because I'm not real happy with how it came out. It looks okay, but it looks more like a polished stone. And I really did want that gemstone look. So I have two options at this point. One is to repaint it, and I've been doing a little bit of research. And if any of you guys have any comments, you know how to make a piece of plastic you paint look like an actual gemstone, please pop them down in the comments, or if you've seen a video and can direct me to one, that'd be awesome, because like I said, I always want to learn new things myself. The other thing I might possibly do is actually take that and cut it out of there, and with my resin printer get some of the translucent blue resin and actually print a separate gem. Not really sure which way I'm going to go. I'll let you guys know, maybe post a separate video on what I did with the gemstone. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. And as always, let's just have fun.